Good morning and God bless you all, my dear friends. It is 10:29 a.m. on Sunday, February 16, 2025. My name is Troy Torres, and I hope you all had a wonderful evening. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. For those of you affected by the federal holiday tomorrow, President's Day, have fun with that holiday. For those of you not affected by the federal holiday, it's going to be another Monday. But we wanted to get the week started with a long-standing conversation and journey that we've been having here at Candidate since 2018. And it was in the wake of the death of 5-year-old Asher Dean Lebofsky at Guam Memorial Hospital, what was confirmed to be, according to an audit by the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the wrongful death of Asher Dean Lebofsky, the malpractice that led to his death. That has since been settled in a civil manner with his father and his mother. But his father, David Lebofsky, who began this crusade for reform of the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act, he continues to grieve, of course, for his child. His mother continues to grieve as well. And even though they have received a token of compensation for the life that was snuffed out from them, David Lebofsky continues on this crusade, not simply for the memory of his son, or so that his son's death was not in vain, but more importantly for him, to ensure this doesn't happen to another parent. And the gist of this crusade has been an archaic law in Guam's books that if you are a victim of medical malpractice, meaning one of your limbs, one of your body parts was mutilated because of negligence by a doctor, because of malpractice, or a nurse, or any type of medical provider, or if the life of your loved one ended due to malpractice, according to the law right now, in order for you as the victim to begin to demand accountability from that medical provider, from that doctor, nurse, allied health professional, whatever, you would have to enter arbitration. And the law says that you would have to pay for arbitration. And the law also says that the arbitration has to come from a specific panel that doesn't exist in Guam. So you have to fly the panel to Guam, house the panel, and then pay, on top of paying for all those costs, pay for all of the other costs associated with the arbitration. So the costs start at an estimated, and a few years ago it was estimated to be around $20,000. Of course, flight costs and hotel costs have gone up. So that cost, that estimate of around $20,000, I will almost guarantee you has gone up significantly, all the way up to more than $100,000. And this is payment in cash. And so if you are poor or in the lower to regular middle class, there's probably no way that you're going to be able to afford arbitration. If you're in the upper middle class, in order for you to afford arbitration, you'd probably have to take out a loan. And so the only people for whom the justice system provides any sort of recourse are the rich. And so proponents of changing this law would argue that the only people who are served by bad doctors with care are people who can afford the litigation, people who they're scared of screwing up on. And everybody else, you can have malpractice with impunity. And opponents of changing this law argue that, yes, there are bad doctors who need to be held accountable, sure. But if you change this law in any significant kind of way, you're going to scare away good doctors from practicing in Guam. Now, with these focal arguments in mind, over the past 6 years, almost 7 years now, the past 3 legislatures, basically, there has been a concerted effort that almost succeeded to reform the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act, just call it the MMMA. And it almost worked. You had a bill by Therese Terlahi, who was at the time the chairwoman of the Legislative Health Committee. It had several co-sponsors. It was bill number 112, and it proposed to grant access to victims of medical malpractice to the court systems. You wouldn't have to, arbitration is a choice, would have been an option. Otherwise, you could go straight into the court system. And there was also a mechanism that she placed in her bill that would basically triage, for lack of a better term, I suppose pun intended, that would triage frivolous lawsuits out of the court system, so that you wouldn't have people making baseless claims or claims that didn't have any sort of evidence behind it, from attracting ambulance chasing lawyers and bogging down the work of doctors and clinics and the hospitals and things like that. It received significant anecdotal grassroots support. Significant. You had, Mr. Lebowski, and you had several other survivors of medical malpractice testifying before the legislature with heart-wrenching stories about what had happened to them. You even have a Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services report that confirms the malpractice that happens, at the very least, at Guam Memorial Hospital. And despite that, and mainly because of the lobbying efforts of some of Guam's doctors, that bill failed, despite the public support for it. And the lobbying by doctors, and there was a clear, vocal doctor in this. It was Dr. Shea who appeared to be rallying the other doctors, and who made the most staunch opposition to the passage of Bill 112. Despite all of the efforts by Therese Terlahi and her committee to compromise, there were significant changes made to that bill to satisfy the concerns of doctors. And even then, you had some doctors working in front of the cameras and behind the scenes to kill this bill, to kill any chance of the poor all the way up to the upper middle class, which is the vast majority of this island, from having access to the court system to make claims of malpractice against bad doctors. So that we change this idea that the only people who have recourse for justice are those who can afford it. And even though that is the right thing to do, some of these doctors threatened senators with their reelection, said that they wouldn't donate to their campaigns, they were going to lose their reelection if they supported this bill. According to Senator Tello Taitigui, I don't have many nice things to say about Senator Tello Taitigui, but I'll tell you this. I respect that woman for the stance she took on Bill 112, to the point where she said that because of her stance, one of her physicians withdrew care from her in retaliation for her stance. And so you see what the regular people of this island are up against. And you saw in the last legislature how senators were scared because of the threats that these doctors were making on their livelihoods and on their policing of public policy, the right public policy to make for the island. And so with this new legislature, there's new people around. The Republicans now lead this legislature. Therese Terlahi, despite those threats from the doctors, came in number one. She didn't receive a single contribution from a doctor, and it made no difference whatsoever. She didn't need them for jack. She became number one without those doctors' support. And so did several other senators who did not receive any contributions from any doctor. In fact, when we reviewed the list of donations, not very many donations from any doctors. And we were able to view this list of donations because a little more than a week ago, we sent an email out to all of the senators. Now, I have to tell you, I failed with Joe San Augustine. So the legislature provides an email address for him. That email address where we sent this list of questions to, they bounced back to us. And after they bounced back, I did not take the time to try to contact Mr. San Augustine through other means. That's my fault, not his fault. Okay, I don't want you to blame him because his name doesn't exist in this story, and it's because I didn't go beyond the email. My fault, not his. Okay, so everybody else who responded, 11 responded, 3 did not. The 3 are Chris Barnett, Tello Taitagui, and Sabina Perez. Everybody else responded. And the questions were very simple. One, it was, what donations did you receive from any medical providers, the clinics that they own or are part of, and any other business that a medical provider is a part of? Okay. The second question is, in spite of these donations, are you able to remain objective in debating, considering, and voting upon any legislation that would in any way reform the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act? And the third question is, would you be willing to, if you understand this issue enough, would you be willing to introduce legislation to reform the MMMAA? And I'm not entirely certain what has happened from the last legislature to this legislature. The only thing I can think of is that some doctors, in their overzealousness on the new hospital location issue, pissed off some of their former supporters in the legislature. Because you had doctors during Bill 112, Theresa Lahi's Bill 112, who were praising Senator Tina Muñoz-Barnes and Senator Will Parkinson for not fully embracing Bill 112 and calling for amendments to Bill 112. Tina Muñoz-Barnes and Will Parkinson, along with new Health Committee Chairwoman Sabrina Salas-Mazzanani, are the 3 senators who, in response to us, said that, yeah, they would be willing to consider introducing legislation to reform the MMMAA. Senator Tina Muñoz-Barnes said that she's going to work with Sabrina Salas-Mazzanani to formulate that legislation. Will Parkinson said, I'm going to introduce legislation. I don't know what the legislation looks like or what is contained in it, but I do know that that's a healthy start, considering that those 2 senators were relied upon by the doctor lobby in the last legislature to be against 112 by Therese Terlahi. Not only that, that's not the only good news in all of this. Every single one of these senators, all 11 of them who responded, said that they would not be swayed in any undue way by a doctor lobby against reform to the MMMAA, and they would consider impartially and objectively all of the points, and they would listen to what the public has to say about this. That's another good sign. Because the last time that we polled senators, not a majority of them answered our questions about this. I'm talking about the last legislature. Then you have the fact that the majority of the Republican senators and all 3 of the Democrat senators who responded to our inquiry all said that they are very much open to passing reform to the MMMAA. And just this morning, right after I got out of Mass, right before I came home to finish up this story and to do this live cast, I get a message from Crystal Paco San Augustine responding to my question to the governor, where the governor has said that although she will not comment on proposed legislation that hasn't even been introduced and for which she has not had the opportunity to review as passed, in general, the governor is very much open to considering legislation that improves current law, which is different from the position that she took last legislature, where before Bill 112 even had an opportunity to pass, Governor Lulian Guerrero said that she would likely veto it. her position has somewhat changed. And I have to believe that this is because the doctors pissed her off and pissed off a whole lot of senators. I have to believe that doctors, since the last legislature, have lost a whole lot of political clout because of how some of them have acted regarding the building of a new hospital. And that has so charged our political leaders with courage and with conviction to not be fearful of these threats any longer by the doctor lobby. I'm not saying this is all doctors. It's probably just one or two in the lead who are most vocal. And in ways that I think people are starting to realize, wait a minute, why are you against this? Wait a minute, why are you against that? Aren't you supposed to be in favor of helping patients? And I'm hearing a whole lot of reasons that you're giving for this, that, or the other thing that used to make sense to me. But in totality, as I'm considering everything that you've been saying over the past several years, now it doesn't sound so wholesome. And it's great news in this journey that you and I, together with Mr. Lebowski, have been on since October 31, 2018, when Asher Dean Lebowski died a wrongful death due to malpractice at Guam Memorial Hospital. Now, there are other things. This isn't just the MMMAA that needs to be reformed. And once we solidify the continuation of this discussion on the reform of the MMMAA, there are two other issues that I want Candid and all of us to journey on. One is reform of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, which has, over the past several years, sat on or ruled against claims by patients of bad medical practice. Not a single claim against a doctor has been ruled in favor of a patient by the GBME in the past several years, or by the Guam Board of Nursing for that matter. And then the second issue, or the third issue, pardon me, is something that one of the doctors brought to our attention. And I think this doctor is right. I don't have his permission to say his name, so I'm not going to say his name. But he said, you know, many doctors are not opposed to reforming the MMMAA so long as what we do doesn't drive out good doctors. And I agree with that. I think a compromise needs to be reached. I don't think we should be doing things that would unduly scare away good doctors from practicing in Guam. But this doctor said, yeah, you can do that, but don't forget to remove sovereign immunity on government doctors and nurses. Because a lot of the malpractice is happening over at Guam Memorial Hospital. And what does it matter if you reform the MMMAA and doctors and nurses who are committing the malpractice at GMH continue to do so with impunity because they have sovereign immunity and they can't be held accountable personally? And while waiving sovereign immunity altogether just sounds like a really bad idea, there has to be some sort of a give. You can't have full sovereign immunity. I think the same thing should apply to the police as well. But that's for a whole other subject. But, you know, these are the conversations about the reforms needed on this island to favor those who have been unfavored for so long. The poor, the middle class, even the upper middle class. The fact that they've had no recourse when they become victims of medical malpractice to hold bad doctors and nurses accountable for their actions. Just because these poor middle class and upper middle class cannot afford to access the justice system, that needs to end. And I'm so happy that this new legislature, with the majority, the vast majority of senators saying they are open to this discussion, they will not be swayed by the doctor lobby, reinforced by the governor saying she highly favors resolution to existing statute that is antiquated. I love it. I love it, my fellow Guamanians. And I hope that this conversation continues in earnest with the introduction of legislation and its follow through all the way to passage and signature by the governor of Guam. For Candid News, I'm Troy Torres. God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and I love you all.